I started going to Southwest State University. I went there a couple years. I got a little homesick, so then I transferred to RCTC and got my associate in liberal arts degree. I started working at Mayo shortly after that and realized that I needed something a little more specialized, so then I went to Minnesota School of Business and worked on my associate and bachelor's for business management. While I was there, I took a course, and I can't remember what the name was, but it was basically about becoming a better citizen. So we had a couple of volunteering projects that we had to do, one of which I selected to do the Dorothy Day House. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but the Dorothy Day House is just a temporary homeless shelter for those that are in need. So when I first started looking for the project, I was kind of looking at, I wasn't looking long-term just to complete the requirements for the class. So a lot of, if you do research, a lot of volunteers, you have to do an interview, a long orientation process. So it worked perfectly for me because I wasn't planning on doing it longer than the course. 3 years later, I'm still helping out there. I cook a meal once a month. I initially got some friends of mine to help out, and then eventually branched out to my coworkers. So it was not only a good way to give back to the community, but to get to know my colleagues on a better level. I chose to share this with you today because not only because I love to learn, but it affected my life in many ways. Going to school, it kind of got me where I am today at work, and it got me into volunteering, which is something I don't think I would have gotten into if I hadn't got introduced to it through school. So any volunteers?
Sleep-induced fog, the sweaty, dank smell of a locker room. Where am I? What state am I in? What day of the week is it? Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters, fellow Toastmasters, and distinguished guests. I want to tell you about a day in the life of a drum corps. But first, before I get into the day, I have to tell you a little bit about what our summer is like. From Memorial Day to Labor Day, we traveled 25,000 miles all across the U.S. and Canada, and there are over 50 competitions that were performed at. So if you do the numbers, we were home about 10 days out of the whole summer. So I've been performed on pro football stadiums from the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, the Mile High Stadium in Denver, Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, Soldiers Field in Chicago, and many others. The day that I'm going to tell you about, we had a competition at Mile High Stadium the night before. As I woke, I could hear the cooks clattering, getting breakfast ready for us. Let me tell you, the food wasn't the greatest. I survived on peanut butter and jelly that summer. If it wasn't for the peanut butter and jelly, I would be completely skin and bones by that time. We'd hit the practice field by 8:30 in the morning, and we start. I played bass bugle, which is called a contrabass. It stands about that high, that wide, and weighs 23 pounds, 8 ounces. Let me tell you, you feel every ounce when you practice 8 to 10 hours every day, besides doing a competition at night. We start with breathing exercises. In for 30, out for 30, in for 30, out for 30. Then we start practicing the music for another 2 to 3 hours. Then we would get together with the drum line and the color guard. So there were 60 horns total, 36 on the drum line, and another 36 in the color guard. And then we would practice our drill. Basically, it was you can compare it to a professional halftime show. It was 13 and a half minutes long. We practiced usually an hour or so before we had lunch. Then we practiced another 4 to 5 hours after lunch to about 5 o'clock at night. Get something quick to eat, if you could call it that. Take a shower and get dressed. And then we're off to the stadium. We get to the stadium at least an hour beforehand to go through breathing exercises again and warming up and getting ready to go. But we were getting excited as the way, as it went along. This, you know, the show was about to begin. You could hear the crowd in the distance cheering for the other corps. We got through the tunnel into the stadium, and you could actually start to see the crowd. Excitement builds and builds. Finally, we get our place on the field, and the PA announcer says, "St. Croix Rivermen, you may take the field in competition." But it was reverberating and stuff. I can't do that, but. Our drum major would be up on his platform and would bark, "Mark time, mark," and the wall of sound would come out. It's incredible amount of volume that 60 horns and 36 drums could put out. And we'd go on for the next 13 and a half minutes. And sometimes it seemed like an eternity. Our uniform, we were black polyester pants, white ruffled shirts, black vests that were lined, blue tails, so down to your knees and lined. And this is the middle of summer, so it's hot and humid. And we had a hat on the top. Let me tell you, I'm being hot just thinking about it. I mean, we got done with the show, went off, marched off the field, and there was a joy. Hey, it was a good show. And relief, it's like, oh, it's done. This night there were 10 corps in the competition, and there were 2 corps after us. So we actually got to sit down, get something to drink, and before I had to go back on the field. Then they announced the scores of the competition, and you're always kind of nervous going, is that us? Did we get that score tonight? Started at 10th place, 9th place, 8th, all the way up. Finally to 3rd, and it was us. We had gotten the best score so far of that summer, which we were excited about. They marched off in the field in reverse order, and then we got to meet with our instructors. They told us for a half an hour what we did wrong. We first started with the horn instructors and then the marching instructors. And we would be reminded again the next day of all the things that we had done wrong. So we go back to the high school gym, and that was a treat if we got to sleep in the high school gym one night. And load up the buses, take a shower, get something else to eat, and load up for our next town. By this time it's about 1 a.m. I learned best place to sleep on the bus is on top of the engine, on the floor, because the buses would stop every 3 to 4 hours. That was your chance to go to the bathroom. If you missed it, you had to wait 3 or 4 hours. Because if you're traveling with a Greyhound for a month at a time, you do not want to use a bathroom. They stink. So I became very adept, and you see all these people kind of going off the buses, going, okay, where are we? And then going back on. Next morning, I woke up, and it was buses had stopped again. It's like, oh, it's late. Oh, we're not at a truck stop. We must be where we're going. Once again, I thought, where am I? What state am I in? What day of the week is this?
2 years ago, 60 deaths and 1,143 injuries occurred to motorcyclists in Minnesota. Perhaps even more shocking is 24 of these deaths and a substantial number of these injuries could have been reduced or even prevented.
Madam Toastmaster.
Fellow Toastmasters, yes. Today I'm going to speak about motorcycle helmets. As we discuss riding the line between personal choice and law. To start off, I'll briefly cover some of my background experience, present some statistical data to support motorcycle helmets, and then I'll finish by letting you know what some of the strong opponents and how they view motorcycle helmets and as it pertains to our laws. I've been riding motorcycles for almost 7 years now. I've been endorsed in 3 different states for motorcycles, and I've ridden in several conditions, from the lone streets of North Dakota to the busy streets of Minneapolis, North Carolina. I've ridden in temperatures as high as 100 degrees and as low as 10 degrees. However, as many of you know, I'm also a registered nurse, and I have experience in the intensive care unit. And on top of that, prior to my nursing, I worked as a direct care staff for a couple of rehabilitation centers for traumatic brain injuries in North Dakota. And so I've seen a lot of the negative effects of not wearing a helmet. I've seen family members walk into an ICU and wonder if their loved one's ever going to come off the ventilator. I've seen them sit at the bedside, physician walks in, the nurse walks in. Every time they tense up, thinking, oh, is there bad news, good news? I've seen the patients in long-term rehabilitation centers look at their loved one, but not be able to vocalize it. Have the grimace and the facial recognition that you know this person. Have tears run down their eyes. I've seen them try to use basic skills such as using a spoon. All of these experiences, as well as my personal riding experience, make this such a strong subject for me and want me to advocate for wearing helmets. Want us to amend what Minnesota's law currently states. Out of all the traffic on the highways, motorcycles account for 2%. Yet we're attributed with 10% of the traffic accidents. Furthermore, research shows that if you're involved in a crash, helmets reduce the deleterious effects. Several studies indicate that greater than 40% of fatalities and approximately 69% of traumatic brain injuries could be reduced or even prevented if motorcyclists would just wear a helmet. Now, this isn't new to legislation. They've been talking about this for 40 plus years, going back and forth. Michigan in 2012 just recently repealed its universal helmet law. As a result, less riders wore helmets and their fatality rates have increased. Similar findings have been found in Florida and Texas after they did similar things. So what can we do to prevent this? There's a couple of laws that we can look at. One, universal helmet law. What is that? That says that anybody on a motorcycle wears a helmet. There's a partial helmet law, which Minnesota has, and that lets the states decide what group of motorcycle riders wear helmets. In Minnesota, it's less than 18 years old. However, research studies link states that have a partial helmet law to states that have no helmet laws in terms of preventing fatality. While those states that have a universal helmet law tend to have statistically lower fatality rates comparatively. So again, my viewpoints are clear. I'm trying to amend what Minnesota currently has in place and seek to hopefully enact a universal helmet law which will protect all riders. However, there's opponents to this, and the major opponents are the motorcycle agency and groups themselves. There's ABATE of Minnesota. On the national level, there's several groups. One of them is the American Motorcycle Association, and those groups emphasize not wearing helmets, but emphasize safety, training, and experience as the leading predictors for not having a crash in the first place. And they're absolutely right. A motorcycle helmet will not prevent you from having an accident. No more than the seatbelt in your car or the airbag in your car will prevent you from having an accident. But that's not what I'm trying to emphasize. I agree with them wholeheartedly that safety, education, and experience is vital. I'm trying to expand on it to the point where, what if you are that person that does have a crash? Wouldn't you rather have that motorcycle helmet? So in conclusion, I've discussed with you some of my personal background experience riding motorcycles and dealing with injuries. I presented some of the statistical information regarding helmets and their benefits. And then finally I discussed some of the opponents' viewpoints as to how the helmets are viewed in their sense and how they don't want it to be a mandatory universal coverage law. However, I leave you with this. I want you to remember the number 24. Because that's the number of motorcyclists that might be with us today had they wore a helmet 2 years ago.